Mixing with Mike mixing tip of the week using channel strip plugins. We're all familiar with channel strip plugins. There are so many of them. There are very good emulations of the SSL ENG series by different companies. There is the API Vision strip. There's the 88RS. There's the more recent V series one that's done by Brainworks. There is some of the older vintage ones that are done by Waves, as far as the TG12345 and the Red Console and all of this. And there's a beauty and a great thing about using channel strip plugins. And while this is not necessarily an audio demonstration, it's more a philosophical approach to working a mix and why you would use a channel strip plugin and how to use a channel strip plugin. The idea of working with a channel strip plugin is that to some degree what you're emulating is actually doing an entire mix through a plugin channel strip. So it's more likely, and not necessarily, there's no one way to mix anything, but it's more likely when you're doing this, the whole key to working on your mix is selecting the right channel plugin channel strip for the sound that you're going after. And part of this is why I created the Power Mixing course. In the Power Mixing course, I go throughout history with all the different channel strip and different consoles, talking about the components that were around at that time and talking about an approach to how you would work a mix and using audio examples as a way of going about it. The purpose of that was to demonstrate something that shows a process and a philosophical method that actually can make your mixes sound cohesive and coherent. One of the cool things about using a channel strip plugin is that you can create a base sort of sonic signature or tonal character sound to the overall mix. You don't even have to do a lot to it. It doesn't have to be your primary EQ. It doesn't have to be your primary compressor. Although, if you're going to certain components, the reason why you would go to it is because of the sonic character of a particular thing. Like, for example, if you're working in this, like in this example with the SSL G series, classic Brit aggressive sound, or the E series, a little bit more of a warmer, but pop, gritty sound from the E series console, where if you wanted to go more for a 70s vintage warm kind of thing character, you might go to the 80 series Neve components and start to build your mix from there. These are the types of things that you can do to sort of set a sonic signature on what it is that you want to do. So whatever level of work that you do, you're putting like a similarity that runs throughout the course of the entire song. So just like to play a quick example, I've done this entire mix with a G series. There's plenty of additional things that need to be added into it, so it's not a finished mix, but just to kind of give you an idea of what this does, here's just like a little bit of a lead-in. And if I just kind of bypass, now of course there's equalization, there's compression, but the idea, and maybe that's just not the fairest comparison, but the whole idea of working with this, and just like a very quick thing, is to show you that we're kind of putting like a Brit edgy sound to this particular mix that I felt like really fit well for this particular style and we have going on here. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm stuck with this. Once I start off with that, then I can add in components. If I want to make something sound warmer, then I go to something that is more vintage Neve if I want. And this is how console mixes have been done historically. So if you were mixing in the 80s and you were mixing on an E-series desk, you would have available to you all the equipment that had been made up to that era. So you would have access to 1073 EQs if they were rack mounted. You would have access to LA2As, to 1176s, to Fairchilds if you were lucky enough to be in a studio that had one. You wouldn't have infinite amounts of them, and that's another part of the approach of working with channel strip plugins. So if you're putting an LA2A, if you put it on everything, then you lose the character of it. So part of working with the channel strip is that it sets like a foundation or a base from which you build the rest of the mix. So now when you put that 2254 on the bass, it gives it a sonic character that is contrasted by the backdrop that's created with the SSL. So if you think of it this way, as sort of if you're painting a picture here with your mix, then this becomes the canvas. The console that you select becomes the canvas. The canvas can be bright, can be dark, it can be have a rich character to it. It could be clean and transparent. However you want to make that backdrop. And then as you start to add in the other vintage components and processing, it now becomes more effective because it works contrasting off of that channel strip. Some people actually put the channel strip plugins across all of the returns, which I think is also a good idea, particularly if you want to just do even some subtle aspects of it, of processing. So even running through the processing there, you will get some of the character and the electronics, or you could use something like an NLS or the Slate Virtual Console, where you kind of mix that element of it in to bring in some of the sonic signature or character. But these are the reasons why you would use it. You don't have to use the compressor and the EQ on every channel when you're kind of working with it. You could be selective and kind of build your mix accordingly, and then selectively kind of add the components that you would need to give the song the character that it needs. And this way you can focus in. And if you do something like you want your vocal to sound really unique in the mix, then put a unique set of plugins that no other channel strip uses. So if you use a Fairchild, don't use a Fairchild on anything else. And it helps to create a contrast that makes it special. So there's a philosophy that extends from the way that engineers mixed because they didn't really have another option. So unlike a plugin, when you buy a plugin, a Pultec plugin, you could just put as many of them as your CPU will handle. In a studio, most studios, very few studios would have more than a couple Pultecs. Power Station was an exception where they actually had Pultecs wired to the output of every channel of the tape machine, feeding into their Neve console in their Studio A. So this was something that was unique, but most studios did not have that. It wasn't an option in terms of working. So, and believe me, engineers wanted it. It just wasn't a realistic possibility. So, but through that, a creative workflow and a sound and great sounding records came from it. And there's a formula there that's really powerful and very cool that's kind of worth looking at. And that's the basic idea. The downfall of working with channel strip plugins, obviously, is there's no insert point in between. So on a real console, like on an SSL console, you would have an insert that could be pre-EQ or post-EQ. And then you could work in the dynamic section relative to that. So as you put inserts, you would get different characteristic sounds by mixing in. So none of the channel strip plugins I've ever seen give you that insert capability. And understandably, it gets a little bit more complicated in terms of the way that you work with it. But these are also considerations. I try to keep my my channel strip plugins all along the same plugin line. This gives me the ability to kind of work them, take them in and out, get an idea of what they're doing if it's the right signature. So one last question, or one last thing, and we'll wrap this up. How do you figure out which is the right one? The quickest way is to stem all of your individual tracks out, and on those stems, place a series of different channel strips, SSL-E, SSL-G, some kind of a Neve 88RS, an API Vision strip, the V-Series Neve, however you want to go, set up a number of channel strips and kind of go through them. Do some basic settings with them on the stem, and then you can get an idea just by quickly going through them. It's like, okay, yeah, which one really just stands out and gives the character to the mix, and then whichever one you select, assuming you have all those different options, that's the way that you go, and then you start setting them up and working with them across the mix. Very simple, very easy method, and very powerful. If you try it out on your next mix, I think you'll kind of get you'll be surprised at how you can get a mix to seem to pull together, be very cohesive, like everything sounds like it belongs together, even if you're doing just a subtle amount with each of the individual channel strips. All right, that's our plugin, our mixing tip of the week, using channel strip plugins.